Thank you. As today is Veterans Day, are there any people present that were in the Tennessee National Guard in Iraq? I think I'm the only one. Are there other veterans here? If there are veterans here, please stand. All veterans, please stand. So. Dean Anderson told you that my family have a connection with East Tennessee. As a matter of fact, this building stands on my great-grandfather Leonard's former farm. In 1911, his sister was a widow, Mrs. Lyle, and she sold her farm to the state to make a normal school, a one-year teacher's training center. And she had previously, her husband had previously sold the property that's now Mountain Home and the Southern Railroad yards, which are now that whole area around State of Franklin Street. But the Clinchfield Railroad had come through and cut off a corner of his farm in the direction of his sister's farm, this way. And so everything from the Clinchfield Railroad down to the street in front of this building was my great-grandfather Leonard's farm. So I do have a connection indirectly. And my cousin David designed the new library, and my archives are in that library. But now you're supposed to start with a joke, and I'm not very good at telling stories, so I'll try to be funny spontaneously. I'm not good at telling straight jokes. But I would like to start tonight because I'm going to be giving a course on trying to understand. Now, anybody that thinks they can understand all the problems in the Middle East in one 3-hour course is a little bit off. And to try to do it in 40 minutes or 30 minutes now is really nuts. But anyway, I'm going to try to give you some background. This is the book I'm going to use. It's called The Peace to End All Peace. One of the generals in World War I said, "This was the war to end all wars. Instead, we built the peace to end all peace." So this is the story of the treaties at the end of World War I that had to do with the former Ottoman Empire. This is the Ottoman Empire in 1580, at probably its greatest extension. It was under Suleiman the Magnificent at that time. I'm going to start with the Ottoman Empire because almost all the problems in the Middle East have something to do with the fact that for 500 years they were under the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was one of the most successful in the history of the world, and therefore, well, it's one of the longest lasting, therefore one of the most successful. And it was successful partially because they ruled largely through local people. And they had a very unique system. Notice that it's all of the Balkans and all of what's now Turkey and Southern Caucasus, Mesopotamia, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. All of this area, you notice that they weren't here. That's uninhabitable practically. That's almost all desert. This, of course, is the Fertile Crescent here. And then Egypt, and across North Africa as far as Tunisia. And they ruled that from about 1453 to 1918. Not all of it all that time, and not all of it absolutely. But there were several things that they did that affect us today. They had something called the millet system. Millet, or millet, means a religious or ethnic community. Under the Turks, every community ruled itself. It had its own courts and laws for marriage, divorce, inheritance, and any crime that involved people only within that community. In other words, if you were a Methodist and murdered a Methodist, you went to a Methodist court. If you were a Jew and killed a Muslim, you went to a Christian arbitrator. And if you didn't accept the arbitration, you went to the Turkish courts. Now, I will tell you that no community went to the Turkish courts more than once a generation, because the Turkish courts were so tough that if anybody in the community could remember what happened, they never went again. So arbitration worked. As long as they had the Turks over them, all these communities could live together. Now, we keep thinking in terms of geographic nationalism. Geographic nationalism is a fairly recent thing in history. These people often lived in the same apartment house. Jew, Greek Orthodox, Muslim, Shia, Muslim, Sunni, all the different religious communities would live cheek by jowl. And yet they had different laws and different communities, but they didn't get along peacefully. We worry about Iraq, and people keep asking me, what's the difference between Sunnis and Shias that makes such a difference? It has nothing in the world to do with religion. It doesn't even have to do with who's going to lead the religious community, which was the original division between Shia and Sunni. Shia means party, and it was Shiat Ali, the party of Ali, the son of the Prophet, and the first cousin of the Prophet, and married to his daughter Fatima, and his first cousin. And there were people in the community, most of them from the Persian speakers to the east, Mesopotamia, who wanted the succession to the Prophet to take place according to blood, according to inheritance. But the Arab tradition was to get together all the leaders and choose somebody who was a viable leader. If you do it by inheritance, you might get a 10-year-old leader. Well, what do you do when there's the next raid or the next war? He can't ride out on a horse and lead. So the Arab tradition was always to choose a viable, virile, fairly young man to be the next leader when one died or was put out. So the Sunni, the majority, 85% of the Muslims, believed in the sense of deciding each time. Now, of course, by the time the Turks took it over in 1520, the Turkish leader was called Sultan. That's a Turkish word. But Khalifa means successor to the Prophet. Successor in everything, all of his powers except prophethood. And so when the Turks took it over, they added the title, nearly 100 years later, in 1520, the title of Caliph to Sultan. And until 1924, the Sultan was also Caliph. But there's been no Caliph since July 16, 1924. And incidentally, the beginning of Islam is 622, also July 16th. And the end of using the Arabic alphabet for the Turkish language was July 16th, 1926. I remember that date. That was the day I was born. No cause and effect. Now there's my joke. I want you to see the extent of the Turkish Empire. Now, this area was from 755 until 1492, largely dominated by Muslims. And the area in Baghdad over here was from 750 until 1258 was the Abbasid Empire. There was a great difference between the two that I want to discuss with you now briefly. The Abbasids tolerated Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. Zoroastrians were never mentioned by Muhammad, but they were the Persian fire worshippers, the Ahura Mazda. But there were so many of them that they had to be accepted as if they were accepted like Jews and Christians were accepted by Muhammad. Muhammad was primarily against paganism because Arabia was entirely separate little tribes, each tribe with different gods. At one time, Muhammad cleared out all the gods in the Kaaba, and there were 526 or something like that. And he broke them all up, and everybody thought the heavens were going to fall in, but they didn't. So he sort of proved that the pagan gods weren't strong. But Muhammad's main emphasis, the whole emphasis of Islam, is against paganism, not against Christianity or Judaism. But he actually thought most Christians and Jews would accept him as the last of the prophets and would become Muslim. But so the main difference between, we're getting back to the Middle East now, the main difference between people today is that for 500 years under the Turks, they had a long history of his great-grandfather killed my great-uncle, blah, 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 all this kind of thing. Memories of anger and persecution.